Today we're going to show you how to set up Target Sprint event. Just how simple it is and straightforward with the minimum amount of equipment and a little bit of improvisation. The first thing you must do is to make sure that you select a suitable venue. Make sure when you're selecting the field that you're covering all the options for your risk assessment and you have sufficient space. I've pegged out an area approximately 25 metres by 15 metres so that way we can set up the range, which is most important. And the range must be set up in accordance with the NSRA rules for setting up a no danger area airgun range. Having pegged out the area that we need to use, I'm now going to take you through the equipment that would be useful in setting up the range and the rest of the event. To begin with, on the left we have our protective screen, and it's in three sections, two 10-metre lengths and one 20-metre length, which will make up the back wall of the range. I'll now take you through each piece of equipment in relation to setting up the range once we've got our back wall complete. The target equipment, which we've designed specifically so it can be stored, including the zeroing box, the zeroing card, and also two pellet boxes for those people who need to put the pellets onto the top of their rifle rack. The orange coloured bib is for the range officer, the chief range officer, who is in charge of the rifle range throughout the event. The other bibs are for members of the team in relation to what other tasks they may be given. Then at the rear is a specially constructed rifle rack, which will be for each individual competitor. Our targets are biathlon style targets, which are manufactured for us by Air Arms. The box which I'm touching now has a diameter of 49.5 millimeters, which is used for the national event. And it's quite simply operated. With every shot, hopefully the competitor will hit the center of the spot, and each of the targets will be covered in that manner. Once the competitor has left the range, the targets are reset simply by pulling the cord and exposing the apertures again. The next target box is set up for the International Shooting Federation competitions, ISSF, and the diameter there is 35 millimeters. If you don't have the equipment so you can use air gun, what we're suggesting is using Nerf guns. Set up a simple stand with some simple cups with string attached to make the job easier to reset, and we can achieve exactly the same. You could also even use water pistols, and the targets could be ping pong balls on the top of toilet roll holders. We're now going to move over to Gorgs, and she'll take you through all the equipment that is needed in addition to setting up the range to run the event.
As you can see, there is some start, finish, scoreboard registration, start list, and arrows and things that are really useful. Also these plastic blobs here, markers to mark out the running course, and fence posts like so. A really useful tool is to have a wheel to measure the route, for accuracy, and we have here a tabard for your marshals to be wearing when they are on the course. This tape here is really useful for keeping spectators back or passers-by, which is really helpful for crowd control. Then moving on to more of the admin side of things, obviously you'll need your medals or some kind of award for your winners, etc. There's race numbers, don't forget your pins, a starting horn or a whistle, and then obviously the important stopwatch, and I recommend having two stopwatches and multiple clipboards to help your staff be able to capture the times accurately. Event dressing and branding is also what makes the event really colourful, bright and attractive. So I can recommend these pop-up banners, which are a little bit more for indoor use, but they're still excellent for here. This material, scrim material, where air can pass through it, is an excellent way of covering various gating and so on and so forth. Also, these pop-up branded pieces are excellent for standing up and then pegging down, like so. And then obviously, if you've got various sponsors which are involved, it's great to be able to publicise them, and for example, banners like this are a great way to showcase that.
The next step to construct our rifle range is to lay everything out, as you can see in the film. Starting with the back wall, we'll construct that. That then centralizes our range in relation to the event location. Once we've done that, we can set up the side walls, the compromise being the length of the material that we're using as a backstop as opposed to the size of the screens. Once that is done and we're happy, as necessary we will brace from the rear if it is very windy. And to set it up, the ideal number is 6. That way there's sufficient people setting up the screens, fitting the brackets and fitting the screens using the cable ties. I'm now going to take you through setting up our improvised target frame. You need a tripod with a bar, a flat metal board, a backing board, the target frame, a series of nuts and bolts, and a zeroing box. We start off with the backing board, and it goes on. That is our improvised target set up. It's braced so it doesn't swing either side, it just has to be leveled, and we're all set to go. Once we've established the position for the target, we now need to move the string back to the 10-meter firing point. That way, once the firer has finished the shoot and started to run again, we can now just pull the string and reset the target. And then once we've finalised the position for the rifle rack, we've checked that everything's in line. That's the range set up apart from the rifles. It's set up in such a way that we can have one safety supervisor per 2 shooters, and overall a range officer, myself, standing back making sure that everything is running safely. As we walk along the line, you'll see that each of the lanes is set up correctly. You will notice that the target apparatus, the pull string to reset the targets after the athletes have fired, is off to one side. This is making sure there's nothing impeding the shooter when they're taking part in the event. As I'm checking as we're walking along to make sure that each stand is exactly the same, the conditions are the same for each shooter, we can then make sure that when we get to the end that the range is safe. I can then hand over to Gorgs from the point of view of the administration and setting up the athletes for the start of the race.
So to look at a few things off the range that you need to consider. Over here we've got the registration area. If we move on, there's an equipment storage area where the rifles can be stored safely. Also an area where the air can be refilled with the refill cylinder. And a key information area where start lists, scores, times and any other information that is key to the venue can be displayed for the athletes and also the spectators. If we walk on down to here, this is where the start-finish area is. We've got our timers here and lap counters, backup for both of those just in case one stopwatch were to go wrong. And then we've got the range in front of us here. The course is marked out with markers, so it's really clear for the athletes to see where the course actually goes. And then when they come back, a nice clear transition area to come into the shooting range to enable nice and safe and simple layout that you can see before us.
What we've shown you so far is a setup for a full event. If you're not able to run that or there's no need, the minimum number you require for one athlete is 3 adults. And their jobs are as follows. My job is the Chief Range Officer and backup timekeeper. We also need a safety supervisor on the range who's looking after the target. If we then look across to our athlete who's waiting on the start line, our starter, timekeeper and admin person is over by the table.
Go.
I'm now going to take you through some alternatives in relation to rifles and equipment. However, we will start off with the latest weapon produced by Air Arms, and that is the TS400. It's specifically designed for this event. The difference being the method of cocking, and also the way in which his pellets are held ready for the event. We'll now move on to a standard Air Arms S400, which is set up in the Sporter model mode. This can be used equally as well. If he hasn't got the facility of having the pellets on the side of the gun, it can be held in a tin on the stand. The standard distance for target sprint is 10 meters from the targets to the firing line. However, as we're allowed to shoot air gun at 6 yards, and we have targets for that range, we could actually run the event with the firing point being 6 yards away from the targets. This makes it more straightforward, a bit more flexible in relation to the space that you may or may not have. You can in fact use the standard spring action air gun, which is more than adequate at 6 yards. Also, another alternative is using a Nerf gun with the type of targetry which we mentioned before. If you haven't got the facilities of having the correct target box, you can manufacture something of your own design as long as it complies with the diameters of the target. That is it. It's up to you. We've presented to you the ideal. We've also given you some alternatives. Please remember that improvisation rules okay. Make it work. Look for reasons to say yes to run the event, not reasons to say no. And best of luck. Enjoy your activities.